really quick. We're going to go to real life case. We're going to get a really basic outline of the system. Then we're going to come back to the pen and paper, learn about it a ton. Promise you, stick around for the pen and paper. I promise you, you're going to learn a ton. Also, I'm going to put this in a playlist called Explained, where I'm going to put all my explained videos in it, and we're going to link it below in the description if you want to look at any of those. I got like desuperheating, I got, you know, the total refrigeration system, I got a bunch of good stuff. Anyway, please stick around, watch the pen and paper. I promise you'll learn a thing or two about a thing or two. So really quick, this is an EPR down here, pocket EPR. So what this is doing is this is holding back pressure on the case side. So if we look on this side, that'll eventually make its way back to the rack. On this side is the case side. This is holding back pressure on the side that's coming from the case. So the refrigerant's going down through the valve, and this valve is holding back pressure on this side, right? So now up here, in our actual case, we have a TXV. So this TXV is responsible for metering or flowing refrigerant into this evap coil over there. And what happens is, so this is the out of the coil, is this little sensing bulb is responsible for the superheat. So you can see this TXV, and then if we follow this down and keep going through, that will come out the bottom of the case, and then we'll get ourselves to our EPR. So now that we have kind of a system in our head, we're going to go to the pen and paper and understand it. Okay, so now that you have a basic outline of just the system, all right, we're going to kind of go over what is going on here, okay? So first off, we're going to start with the heart of a system, which is the compressor. The other compressor, right, you have your discharge. Your discharge is, you know, let's say 180 PSI, right? We're following that. We go to our condenser, okay? That's where the heat comes out of, okay? And out of that condenser, it condenses down the refrigerant into a liquid. Now we have our liquid line that goes to the receiver, out of the receiver to our liquid header. Now from there, this liquid refrigerant comes down to the TXV, and that TXV meters or flows that liquid refrigerant into this evaporator coil, okay? And it has this sensing bulb on the other side of the evaporator coil, right, that will adjust the superheat across the coil based on the setting that it's preset to be. For this example, we'll use a superheat of 3 degrees, okay? So what is happening here? So we have this liquid refrigerant that hits this TXV, and this TXV is metering this refrigerant out. That means it's releasing it slowly out into the evap coil as a liquid, okay? And now this EPR holds back pressure for this evaporator coil, okay? I wanted to make a real quick point of clarity, okay? This EPR can hold back refrigerant as long as this side of the EPR is a lower pressure. So this side could be, for instance, it'll probably be set to 10 PSI, which is negative 29 degrees, or it could be 0, it could be in a vacuum, you know, it could be 500 microns, doesn't matter. It will hold back refrigerant on this side of the EPR. But if this side, let's say this side is 30 PSI, then on the evap coil side of the EPR, it will also be 30 PSI. It can only hold back. It can't magically make this have a lower pressure. Okay, so it can only hold back. So typically what they'll do is they'll set a suction group to, like, you know, 10 PSI, and then they'll run that, and this EPR will hold it back, and you set the EPR for your desired temperature. And why does it do that, right? So this EPR is set for 16 PSI, which for 507 refrigerant corresponds to a negative 20 degree coil. But how? How does that work? How does that correspond to a negative 20 degree coil? Because it is the theoretical temperature that 507 refrigerant will evaporate if it's at 16 PSI. So this liquid that comes out in there, it needs to be negative 20 degrees before it can evaporate, right? Now, you might say to yourself, well, that case is probably, like, let's say if you first started up, that case is going to be a lot hotter than negative, 20 degrees, right? But the thing is, in order to evaporate, this liquid refrigerant that comes out into the coil, it cannot be warmer then negative 20 degrees until it evaporates. Okay? I also wanted to clear up one more point of confusion is this liquid refrigerant cannot heat up more than negative 20 degrees because of the conditions that it's under. But when it changes its state to a vapor, right, now that vapor can heat up, right? So this liquid refrigerant absorbs the heat to transform, to change its state into a vapor, and that vapor now absorbs heat to increase in temperature. So in the beginning we have this negative 20 degree liquid, and because of our 3 degrees of superheat, on the other side we'll have 3 degrees increase, we'll have a negative 17 degree vapor coming out of the coil. Just want to clarify that. So I'm going to show you an example I'm going to actually get my other piece of paper, and then I'll show you a physical example, right? So we're going to use water, right? Just water. We'll just use water, okay? So let's say we have water, like this is a poorly drawn section of the earth, right? Now let's say we have water, right? Just at like sea level, at, you know, where we normally live. It'll boil at 212 degrees. If we move water up to the top of a mountain, it'll boil at, I think the amount of Machu Picchu is actually 200 degrees. Why? Because there's less pressure at the top of the mountain than there is at sea level. Because if we, you know, granted, if we just draw this kind of stuff up there, there's an atmosphere above it, right? And there's so much more atmosphere above this water right there that it has a greater pressure up there. So down here, ooh, it's getting thundery out. It's 14 psi of atmospheric pressure. And up there, it's a lower amount of atmospheric pressure, which causes this water to boil at different temperatures, right? Now, if we take it even further and we go down to the bottom of the ocean with all the weight of the water on it, it'll boil at well over 1,000 degrees where those thermal vents are at the bottom of the ocean where those little fishies live or whatever. Right? So if we were going to kind of use an example of this, right, and I'll show you those two examples in real life too, right, is if we spray water, let's say we're a firefighter, right, and we spray water into 1,000 degree room, right, does all the water instantly evaporate? No, all that water needs to heat up to 212 degrees or it has to evaporate before it gets any warmer, right? So that's water, right? It won't evaporate instantly because, so here's just a physics thing, this is just something we know, is it takes 7 times the amount of energy to evaporate a molecule than it does to heat it up 1 degree. So to change that state from this liquid to a gas, it takes 7 times the amount of energy to do so. So when this water goes into this room, this water, let's say this is atmospheric pressure, is staying at 212 degrees. Even though it's in 1,000 degree room, it's staying at 212 degrees because it's at atmospheric pressure. Now if we moved it up to the top of Mount Machu Picchu, it would be 200 degrees because that's the pressure at that point. That's the atmospheric pressure at that altitude, okay? It's not 1,000 degrees, it's still only 200. So this 200 degrees is less than 1,000 degrees, right? So all the heat from here is going to be attracted to the 200 degrees because hot goes to cold. Okay, that's just how things work. High energy goes to low energy, right? So likewise, when we have refrigerant, right? We have this TXV releasing refrigerant into this coil. Now, because of the pressure that this EPR is set to, okay, this refrigerant has to evaporate or boil at negative 20. It's just a property of the refrigerant. If it was a different refrigerant, it would have a different property. Okay, so this EPR, so what this EPR does is as this evaporates, right, it'll build up pressure there, right? Kind of like an aerosol can, right? Because not only is this TXV adding refrigerant, which is squishing this down and squishing these molecules together, and these molecules don't want to be together, right? So it raises the pressure. When this EPR sees that this is any other pressure other than 16, it allows flow across it, right? So all this EPR cares about is the pressure, and it flows the refrigerant in order to keep the desired pressure, which we know corresponds to, in this case, to a negative 20 degree coil. Now, what does this TXV do? This TXV only cares about superheat. So theoretically, if it's negative 20 here, and we're targeting 3 degrees of superheat, it should be negative 17 degrees over on the other side of the coil, right? That is warmed up 3 degrees from one side to another. So let's say we have an extreme load on this coil. What's going to happen? Well, if we have an extreme load on this coil, okay, this superheat is going to go crazy. It's going to, let's say, be 30 degrees superheat. And this TXV, this sensing bulb right there, has a gas in it. And that gas is going to heat up. It's going to push on the valve and it's going to open that TXV. That's going to flow more refrigerant into the system because this TXV goes, hey, that's not okay. Our temperature, our superheat, the amount that it's supposed to heat up from here to here is just wildly out of whack. So we're going to flow refrigerant into this coil to try to cool it off, right? Now this EPR is going to notice that too, because when we have more flow, we're going to have more molecules squished into a small space, right? And that gas is going to smush with all that extra liquid, and that gas is going to raise in pressure, and that EPR is going to go, oh no, we can't allow that, and it's going to regulate the pressure to stay at 16 psi to the best of this EPR's capabilities. So what does this do? This allows a stable environment in which this evap coil will always be around negative 20 degrees, which allows you more stable case operation. For instance, if this EPR wasn't here, right, and you only had a TXV, our compressors, this pressure would vary wildly, okay? So it would be, let's say, you would have a high cutoff and a low cutoff, and that would vary from, like, let's say, 40 psi down to 10 psi, right? So you're going to get so at 40 psi, I'm not entirely sure what this would be with 507. I'm going to go on a limb and say it's probably something like maybe 20, maybe 15. So it's going to be a 15 degree evaporator coil. Then when it goes down to 10, it's going to be like a negative 30, right? So you're going to have this wild heat variability in the case. So you're going to have it be really cold and really hot, then really cold and really hot. And it's going to kind of be at the mercy of the compressors. So with the EPR, we can better set our system. We can have a more stable flow across this TXV, and it also saves on energy as well. So not only does this EPR create more stability in the circuit, right? So now it'll more likely be this negative 10 degrees or whatever your thing is set to. So we have a negative 20 degree coil. It will stick at negative 20 degrees, causing us to have a negative degree case. It gives you more control over, let's say if you have dual temperature cases or cases that are capable of running multiple temperatures, medium temp and low temp, right? Also on top of that, you can have real precision in, let's say ice cream versus frozen food. Ice cream needs to be negative 20. Frozen food can be negative 10. Okay, and now you can set that, and that's an energy savings. Also, part of the energy savings is now you can maybe have, maybe you can have smaller compressors with compressor cycling techniques, right, installed into the controller and programmed. So now all you got to do is worry about keeping this around 10 psi, 10 to 15 psi, right? Rather than having these large swings, maybe you could have 2 compressors constantly running, and then when the EPR opens, the third one goes on. Anyway, this keeps things more consistent, allows for a more consistent compressor cycling in their EMS system, which provides greater efficiency. Now, I know a lot of guys, myself included, kind of are sick of efficiency, sick of these kind of things, sick of like, oh, come on, it makes our lives terrible, it makes our lives hard. The truth is, when you're paying $35,000 a month for energy costs, 10% efficiency is huge. Okay, some of these systems, even a single condenser system, they can pay for themselves in 2 or 3 years with energy costs. And supposedly
the profit margin of supermarkets are only 1 to 2%. So they need to run lean. They need to have these efficiencies in order to get ahead. Now, anyway, I'm going to show you guys some real life examples on what is going on in there, and try to link it back. And hopefully these real life examples coupled with my explanation will help you guys kind of just link all this and see the physics and see how it's going on. Anyway, take a look.
See, even though it's boiling and more water is coming out, it's just fluctuating between 211 and 212 degrees. And that's just more so because I can't hold my hand any deeper in the pot because it burns. So I've been looking for an analogy for this. I think it's pretty good. Look, think of the hose as a TXV, right? So even though the water, right, goes into an environment, right, where it should evaporate instantly, because that's, maybe let's say it's 1,000 degrees, right? The water will eventually evaporate, just like refrigerant, right? But you can see how that moisture is clinging to the rock, and then it evaporates away. It's just like the refrigerant. So you're going to have this initial evaporation that happens as soon as the water touches it. You can see, like, it evaporates instantly. You can see that by the smoke. And then you can look at all the water that you can actually physically see that wood's still wet. And all of that extra water is now evaporated. Similar to how when a refrigerant blasts into an evap coil, you have 20% of it flash off, become that fog initially, and then you have that other 80% that slowly evaporates away. Thing just to physically explain what's going on. So now that this is at the appropriate pressure for this to be at -20, right? So typically at -20, case will be about -10. So we're going to be in some type of case. In this case, I'm going to draw it around the evap is going to be around -10 degrees, right? -10. Typically it's 10 degrees above. So -10 is warmer than -20, right? So this -10 degrees is going to transfer heat to the coil. It's going to touch the pipes of the coil. That's why the fan circulates it. And this refrigerant inside the coil is going to touch the sides of the coil. And that refrigerant is going to absorb the heat energy from inside the case. Just want to throw this in there. One of the ways you can think of the absorption is liquid comes in there, right? Absorbing, nothing's happening. Absorbing, but the molecules on a molecular level, they're getting more and more strained. They want to come apart. They want to change state. But remember, it takes 7 times the amount of energy to change state as it does to increase 1 degree. So this is absorbing, still liquid, absorbing, then breaks apart. Now it's a little bit of vapor, breaks apart, a little bit of vapor, absorbing, breaks apart, a little bit of vapor until you get to the end of the coil, and now it's all vapor. And now that vapor slowly increases in temperature, you're 3 degrees, and that gets you a 3-degree differential. So it's like a slow, even though this is a liquid and it's not changing its state for a couple seconds or a minute or two, it's still absorbing tons of heat from the case around it. So that 10 degrees is going all in that liquid refrigerant. Even though it's still a liquid, it's still absorbing it, because on a molecular level, it's starting to shake and it's vibrating more because, heat and vibration. You can look into that, how the molecules vibrate. But basically, the molecules are vibrating more and more and more, and then they break apart and it turns into a vapor. That heat energy is going to go through the EPR, right, into the compressor, out the discharge, and now at this point, you have the heat energy from the case that we absorbed, the heat energy from the compressors and the windings and everything inside the compressors, the heat energy from the friction from the side of the pipe, the heat energy from traveling around the store. We have all that heat energy, and that heat energy is going to go up to the condenser. The condenser has these giant fans, and it's going to blow on those pipes, and it's going to expel all that heat energy to the outside world. Anyway, I hope that understands. So this TXV only cares about the temperature across the coil, and this EPR only cares about the pressure, right? So we can have a desired evaporator temperature that we can set as the technician. So in this case, we're at this one right here. This is a CDS valve, which is a type of EPR, which is a evaporator pressure regulator. A CDS valve is an electronic one, so it has a little, like a little orifice that grows and shrinks and grows and shrinks and grows and shrinks, to feed refrigerant across that EPR valve as needed. Okay,
So you could also have for a TXV, this is just a metering device. You could have an electronic expansion valve. It doesn't have to be a TXV. That's a TXV that uses, you know, electronic temperature probes and a controller to control it. So I just wanted to mention that. So EPR is concerned with pressure. TXV is concerned with temperature difference, right? So let's say if we turned up this TXV, it wouldn't really lower the pressure at all. It wouldn't. And this superheat is designed for the case typically. So this superheat will say at operation conditions, by the time this makes it to the end of the coil, let's say 95% of it has been evaporated. Okay, that is kind of like, you know, what the engineers who designed it, something like that. And that means that we got straight vapor going back to your compressors. We're not going to slug or send liquid back, which can damage our compressors. So this TXV is only concerned with the superheat. And, you know, the engineers have gone, well, if we have enough flow to get us 3 degrees of superheat, then our evaporator will more than likely be at temperature if it is now set to the proper EPR temperature, which was -20. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Now, if you actually open the TXV all the way, you can actually cause your case to run warm. Why? Because now you're just putting in tons of refrigerant, and you think to yourself, oh, well, that's great, because, you know, it's all -20, it's going to be great. But your issue is, now that you have so much refrigerant, your EPR might not be rated for that refrigerant, that flow of refrigerant. It's not rated for that amount of tonnage. So what's going to happen is you're actually going to raise in pressure. So this pressure might go from 16 to 40, and now you have a case that's running warm and your TXV is cranked all the way open. You're like, I don't understand. I turn my TXV on. More refrigeration. That's good, right? No, because your EPR might not be rated high enough to deal with that kind of flow, thus causing your pressure to raise. And remember, now it's going to boil at a different temperature than we need it to be for the case to work. Anyway, I hope that cleared up any confusion. I hope my thoughts made sense. I hope I helped somebody. If you have anything else to add, put it below, please. I want this to be a place for people to learn, grow, develop, you know, kind of have the training as a technician that I wish I had when I first started. Anyway, please like, subscribe, and all that. Hope this was a good video. I'm going to link the playlist to all my explain videos below. Yeah, and that's how you do it.